Hey guys, Mortorcus here. So in this video, we're going to be talking about Priest. We're going to be doing our final review on all of their cards for Ashes of Outland with the context of the entire set, which we have now seen. I have theorycrafted some deck lists for the upcoming expansion, and I have used my experience theorycrafting those lists to fully understand just how I feel about all of these cards in the context of actually building a deck around them, and we will be looking at those deck lists at the end of this video. So let's hop right into it and check these cards out. So the first one we have is Reliquary of Souls, 1 mana, 1/3, with Lifesteal and Deathrattle. Shuffle Reliquary Prime into your deck. And Reliquary Prime is a 7 mana 6/8 with Taunt and Lifesteal. Only you can target this with spells and hero powers. So I think this is a really powerful card. I think 1 mana 1/3 is a very good stat line for a 1-drop, and having Lifesteal on it just makes it stronger than your usual 1-drop for sure. If it sticks on board, you can drop some buffs on it and make that Lifesteal have more impact, and the health of course makes it stickier in general. And the Reliquary Prime is a huge Lifesteal taunt. Lifesteal taunt go very well together because you're protecting yourself, and when your opponent is forced to interact with your minion, you're also getting that health back. Not to mention they can't use removal on it, and you can buff it up some more as well. I put this in all my priest decks, and I think it will probably go in every priest deck aside from probably Res Priest if Res Priest is still around. But I'm definitely giving this one 5 stars. Then we have Imprisoned Homunculus, 1 mana, 2/5 demon, dormant for 2 turns with Taunt. So this is definitely a good turn 1 play. You play it on turn 1, you get a 2/5 Taunt on turn 3, which is definitely a good minion to have on turn 3. But this whole dormant thing is definitely quite a drawback when you don't get it on the turn that you want it to be on. So if you draw this any later than turn 1, it's going to be a pretty unimpactful minion. Just a 2/5 taunt is definitely helpful in some ways in protecting you from taking damage and getting aggro down and stuff. But the later you draw it, the less impactful it's going to be. I do think it's good if you do play it on 1. It's not like crazy or anything, but I did put it in my Highlander Priest. I think it's a playable card. I'm going to give it 3 stars. Then we've got Setec Veilweaver, 2 mana, 2/3. After you cast a spell on a minion, add a priest spell to your hand. So this card is very similar to Lyra the Sunshard, people have said. Except for the fact that it does have the more narrower application where it only gives you a spell if you cast something on a minion. Though we did get quite a few spells that you can cast on minions this expansion, and I think that this will fit into decks where you want to be doing that. Looking at the priest pool of spells, more than half of the spells are targeted, so it is quite possible that if you play 1 to 2 spells with this, that you should be able to continue a cycle of spells, getting more and more as you target other minions with it. So you can play it quite similar to Lyra in most cases, I think. And it is cheaper, which is very important, and more well statted for its mana cost, because that was a 5 mana 3/5. This is a 2 mana 2/3. I did put it in most of the deck lists that I made because it just seems like it's a very strong tool. It'll give you a lot of extra value and stuff, and a lot of these priest decks I think will center around a lot of targeted spells like buffs and stuff like that. So I'm going to give this one 4 stars. Then we have Dragon Maw Overseer, 3 mana 2/2. At the end of your turn, give another friendly minion +2/+2. If you don't have any other minions on board when you play this, it's just a 2/2 that does nothing. That is terrible for 3 mana. So obviously, it's going to be very important for your priest decks to be able to stick their 2-drops and stuff like that. I think that might be pretty possible with what we've got here, with the amount of health that we can put on minions and stuff in the early game. So I think that it fits into these more tempo buff, snowball-y based priest decks. Hopefully that ends up working. It might be a little difficult depending on what classes are really out there and what they're running. Rogues obviously are normally quite efficient in clearing things out with backstabs and stuff like that, but maybe they won't be able to clear it out that early. But yeah, I think this is pretty good. We'll see if it ends up actually being able to pull its weight. I think for now I'm giving it 3 stars. Then we have Dragon Maw Sentinel, 2 mana, 1/4, Battlecry. If you're holding a dragon, gain +1 attack and lifesteal. So this one I compared to Wormrest Agent. It is basically the same card, except instead of taunt, you get lifesteal. From what I've seen, I tried out some of the pre-built decks on the pre-release event, and this seemed really strong. It definitely seems like lifesteal is more impactful than taunt almost always, I'd say. It makes it a huge threat that needs to be removed. You can't ignore it. It's going to continue to keep you alive against these aggro decks because they have to kill this first or else they're not actually making any progress. My only concern with this is that the dragons we currently have are mostly higher costed, as is normally the case, to be honest. Especially these lower costed dragons, a lot of them have untargetable by spells and hero powers, which is good in other classes, but in priest that is really not what you want. You want to be able to be putting these buffs on them and healing them up with your hero power and stuff like that. So I really like this card in Dragon Priest. I'm just not sure if Dragon Priest is going to be fast enough. But if you get this on turn 2 every time, you're definitely not going to have too many problems, because this will keep you in the game for the early game for sure. So because of my reservations about whether I think the Dragon Priest is going to be a viable deck, I'm going to give this one 3 stars. Then we have Skeletal Dragon, a 7 mana, 4/9 dragon, taunt, and at the end of your turn add a dragon to your hand. So this definitely seems like a really strong dragon. It's got a very defensive stat line, which makes it really good for keeping it alive, getting you to get extra dragons and value off of its end of turn effect, and potentially you end up snowballing the game with this kind of a card. You can keep healing it with your hero power and putting different buffs on it. You can use Psyche Split on it to get 2 of them and that kind of stuff. So I really like this dragon. The only thing is that, of course, it's 7 mana, which is a little slow, but the fact that it does have taunt does keep you alive, so that is really important. But again, with this Dragon Priest thing, not sure if it's going to be able to keep up with these faster decks, so I'm going to give it 3 stars. Then we have Renew, 1 mana, restore 3 health, discover a spell. So this is 1 mana cheaper than your hero power, you're getting 1 extra healing, and you're discovering a spell. You could potentially discover this again, so you could heal up a bunch and cycle into a new spell at the end. I really like this with the buff synergy and the Setec Veil Weaver, because you're getting 2 spells out of this 1 spell if you're using it with the Setec Veil Weaver. And like I said, I did end up running Setec Veil Weaver in quite a few decks, and this definitely fits in all of those decks as well. I think this will fit in most decks, to be honest. You might even run this in a Res Priest and stuff like that for that flexibility. Basically any priest deck, you'd want that flexibility, I think. And priest spells are quite strong and fit into a lot of different situations. So I'm going to give Renew 5 stars. Then we have Apotheosis, 3 mana, give a minion +2/+3 and lifesteal. So this is a really impactful buff, I think, because lifesteal is just a really strong keyword. Now you can just give it to any minion in addition to these stats. The stats are a little bit below what you'd hope for, but you're paying a little bit of a cost for the lifesteal, obviously. The same thing I said with the Dragon Maw Sentinel, you can see with this one, you put lifesteal on a minion, it suddenly becomes extremely important to remove. They need to deal with it, or else they can't go face, because you'll just negate all that damage. It makes your minion hard to ignore. It doesn't have taunt, but it still has that effect of being able to keep you in the game. And the extra health can make your minion more survivable and stuff like that. Of course, the only problem with any buff card is that you need to keep your minions on board, so hopefully these priests will be able to keep their boards alive in these tempo buff related priest decks. But I think they will succeed at that. I'm going to give this 4 stars. Then we have Psyche Split, 5 mana, give a minion +1/+2, summon a copy of it. So this one's a little expensive and is even more reliant than all these other cards are, with your minion being able to stay on board and survive. As I was building decks, I often felt that this was a little too high mana costed and too much of a requirement, hoping that you're going to have a minion stick and have the 5 mana available to you. So generally hoping that something is still on board coming off of turn 4 into turn 5. I just ended up not really running it in most of my decks. I think that in most cases it'll be a little bit too awkward. I think if it does work, then it will be insane. But I think that in the meta we're going to be having, I don't expect that this will have a huge impact or anything like that. I think it's not a terrible inclusion in decks. I think that you could use it, and maybe Priest will be able to stick things really consistently, and it will be more impactful than I think it is, and we'll want to be running it in more decks. But for the time being, most of my decks don't have it in there. I'm just going to give this 3 stars. Then we have Soul Mirror. 7 mana, summon copies of enemy minions, they attack their copies. So this seems pretty strange of a card, like trying to imagine exactly how it'll play out. So oftentimes I think this will be a clear on most minions. They normally will be at a similar level of health and attack, if not more attack, if we're going to be having a more aggressive meta after all. When they do have more health, I think a lot of minions like that have some sort of upside, and then if you get to keep your copy and get that upside, that's often not too bad either. We are losing Mass Hysteria, so in a controlling, slower priest deck, this could definitely fit in there when you can't wait all the way until Plague of Death, which is obviously 9 mana, a little bit too expensive. And you have more situational board clears like Shadowward Ruin only hitting 5 attack or higher minions, and Holy Nova being more playable at 2 damage for 4 mana instead of 5 mana, but the 2 damage is still not necessarily going to clear these mid-sized minions. So this can fit in a control deck for sure, I think. Just, you can't really run this in a Res Priest, and that is often a deck that will want board clears as well. So I have it in my Highlander Priest, but that might just be the only place that it'll fit, so I'm going to give it 3 stars. Alright, so let's look at the different decks that I have built for this coming expansion. So the first deck we're looking at is a tempo buff priest. It does have a little bit weird inclusions, I'd say, just because even with some of the stronger early game minions we have now, there's still a little bit of an absence because of the fact that priest has, generally speaking, in the past not gotten very strong early game minions. So I have stuff like Bone Chewer Brawler and Grand Mummy in here. Not things you see a lot of. But yeah, we've got Blazing Battle Mage and Reliquary of Souls as our 1-drops, both high-statted 1-drops. We have the Setec Veil Weaver, which is going to be letting us go off on all these buffs that we're going to be casting. And the buffs we have are Renew, Apathesis, and Power Infusion. And we have a few other removal-related targeted spells that also work with Setec Veilweaver and can give us more spells that hopefully get more copies of these other impactful buff spells that we already have 2 copies of in the deck. I also have Dark Prophecy, which hasn't really seen play before, but I think in a tempo priest deck like this will be a good inclusion. Also, Mind Flayer Courage is in here, which I think will be a strong 3-drop. High Priest Ahmed, of course, can really snowball your board if you get it to stick and get some minions going afterwards. And I have Octosari because Priest is pretty hurting for draw right now. I couldn't really run any other sort of draw. Hopefully the Setec Veilweaver just gives you enough value, but the Octosari is in there, so you get that refill once you've thrown out all these more low mana costed cards trying to keep up on tempo. You're gonna need a reload like that. Alright, the next one we got is a Dragon Priest. So we've got some similar cards here. I think Dragon Priest is, to some degree, will have a similar game plan. I think they just have a higher curve a little bit because of the cost of most dragons and stuff like that. But we do have the Reliquary of Souls, of course, obviously again. We have the Dragon Maw Sentinel, which will be a very strong 2-drop. We have the Breath of the Infinite, which should be active most of the time. So you've got that small level clear, which will not be impacting your own board as you're building it up in almost every situation, I'd say. We've got the Frizz Kindle Roost to try and reduce the cost of some of our dragons, which include Big Old Whelp, which gives us some draw, which, as I said in the last deck, is definitely something that Priest does not have a lot of. We've got the Chrono Breakers, which are giving us more ability to clear out our opponent. If they want to remove our threats, we'll remove their threats. We have one Aeon Reaver, which I think is definitely not a bad amount of tempo if you're able to remove something with it. Then the 2 Skeletal Dragons, which are going to be the main MVPs of this deck, I'd say, or at least that's what you're hoping for. We got 1 Psyche Split, because I think you will last a little bit later into the game with this, and then 2 Grave Runes, because we do have pretty large minions. I didn't want to include Grave Rune in the other deck because the minions were a little too small, but in here, if you drop it on one of these larger dragons and stuff like that, you're going to feel good when your minion dies and you get 2 more copies of it for sure. And the Psyche Split letting you copy something that has Grave Rune on it is a really cool combo. Then we've got a Highlander Galakrond Priest. We've been seeing a little bit more of that kind of a thing lately. It's going to look a lot different now, I'd say, from what we've seen in the past. So it's obviously got the whole Galakrond package in here. It's got Imprisoned Homunculus, because it's just a good thing to drop early on, and we don't have a ton of different options here. We also have Imprisoned Vilefiend, which I think is a pretty good inclusion in slower, more controlling decks, which is definitely leans a little bit more towards that, given its limited options otherwise. It's mostly a value-based deck, getting value off of these invocations on Galakrond and eventually the Galakrond hero power itself. And of course, just running Zephyrus, Dragon Queen, lots of solid minions like the Convincing Infiltrator, the Water Bear, stuff like that. So I think that this might be pretty good deck. Zephyrus and stuff like that can often carry a deck pretty strongly. We'll see if these new inclusions to the deck, like the Skeletal Dragon and stuff, will be strong enough. Like the Reliquary of Souls is just such a strong minion on its own. Maybe all this stuff makes the Galakrond Highlander Priest stronger. But also the thing is that every other deck out there is probably going to get quite a bit stronger. Yet to be determined. We'll keep our eye on this one. And this last deck is a little bit more of a meme deck for sure. I'm trying to come up with 4 decks per class, so this one I got a little bit more creative with. This is a Deathrattle Priest. I was trying really hard to find a deck to put Terran Gorefiend into, and hilariously enough, it ended up going into this Priest deck. So it's got Deathrattles all over the place. It's got the Reliquary of Souls, obviously. It's got Evil Conscriptors, Grand Mummy, Loot Hoarder, Serpent Egg. Serpent Egg, I think, will be a big, important card in this deck. And then it's got Shadowy Figure, which can copy other Deathrattle minions. Bad Luck Albatross, which clearly, if you've been playing lately, you know that its disruption of Highlander decks is a super important thing in the meta right now. And disruption of draw in general is also good, and it does both of those things. We've got Embalming Ritual and Grave Rune to just snowball these super hard. I even ran a Lar, because why not? It's a meme deck already. And Psychopomp to be bringing back these Deathrattles. And Convincing Infiltrator is probably the best Deathrattle minion we've got in Priest right now, so that one's got to be in there. And this Wretched Reclaimer, which I think works the best on the Serpent Egg, but definitely works on a lot of these Deathrattles. I think this will be a very fun deck to try, and it would be hilarious if it actually did anything of value, but we'll see. Alright, so that's it for this video. We've looked at all the Priest cards, all of the decks that I've come up with. I hope that you will give these a shot and let me know in the comments if you end up finding success with them, if you enjoyed them. Also let me know what you think of Priest, if you think they're going to be good in the next meta. Please leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe to see more of my content in the future. I will be finishing out the rest of the classes for these final card reviews. Please drop by my stream at twitch.tv/morktorkus. I'm on there 5 days a week, 7 p.m. PST, playing Hearthstone. So anyways, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it so much, and I'll see you guys in the next one.